The two question types I want to talk about tonight are kind of two categories, or the two main question types in two categories. Last time we talked about conclusion questions. You guys remember the passages? They can fall into two categories. Do you remember? So you're reading the passage. The passage can be one of two types. A set of facts or an argument.
Okay.
Yeah. So a set of facts is just a bunch of claims or statements. What's an argument? Okay, at a minimum you have to have at least one premise and a conclusion. A lot of these arguments have multiple premises. Maybe they even have a premise that supports a conclusion, and that conclusion turns around and supports another conclusion, right? But the point is either you're going to have an argument or you're going to have a set of facts. The vast majority of these are arguments. So like 75% of them are arguments, 25% are not arguments, okay? Now, when you do read an argument, you're going to need to identify what the conclusion is and what the premises are, and try to figure out whether or not the premises prove the conclusion. In any case, we're going to talk about specific question types tonight. Last time we did a couple conclusion questions, right? And it was just like, okay, can you identify where the main conclusion is in the argument? Tonight we're going to talk about inference questions and strengthening questions. So here's your lovely argument, or passage I should say, because we don't know whether it's an argument or a set of facts. In inference questions, an inference question is something like, which one of the following answer choices must be true? An inference question says, if the claims above are true, which one of the following must also be true? An inference question might also say something like, if the claims above are true, which one of the following could be properly concluded on the basis of those claims? Or, which one of the following follows logically from the claims above? Now, I just said a bunch of different questions, but they're all asking the same thing. What they're asking you to do is to assume that the claims in the passage are true, and then to deduce something from them, right? What must follow? What logically can be inferred from those claims? Yes?
One of the questions, a specific question where it reconciles the disparities.
Yes.
Is that also an inference?
That's not an inference question. In those questions, they tend to say something like, which one of the following, if true, most helps to resolve the paradox or the discrepancy? And so since they're saying which one of the following answers, if true, they're granting that each of those answer choices are true. They're saying which one, if it were true, would do the most to help you out. Here, we're saying if the claims in the passage are true, if these are true, then which one of the following answers below has to be true? The correct answer is generally going to be one of two things. It's either going to be a restatement of one of the claims. Right? If I tell you that apples are delicious, ice cream causes cancer, and fish should be banned. Right? If I said those three things. And then one of the answer choices said, apples are delicious. You'd be like, okay, if the claims above are true, which one of the following must be true? Yeah, it must be true that apples are delicious because you just told me that, right? So, the reason I point this out is that sometimes in these questions, it will say, which one of the following can be properly inferred from the claims above? And people see an answer choice that restates one of those claims, and they say, well, that's not an inference. That's already been said. And so then they don't pick it. But unfortunately, an inference is simply anything that must be true given what was said. So it's the most basic answer on the planet, but it's 100% correct. It would be a bummer to get it wrong just because you're a little twisted around about what they're asking for. All they're asking for is if the claims above are true, which one of the following must be true? And you're saying, yep, you already told me that, so that must be true, and that's the answer. That's true in reading comp too, by the way. So sometimes in those inference questions in reading comp, like what can be inferred from the passage, and people are like trying to think beyond the passage. If it just says it in the passage, that's the answer. All right. The other option, so it could restate something that was already said. The other option is, and this is more common, but it could combine two or more of the claims to give you a new claim, but a claim that is nonetheless proven. So, for example, if the original passage said, apples are delicious and some delicious things. Oh no, that's not going to work. Shoot. Alright, how about this? Some apples are delicious. All delicious things are glorious. And glory is bright. Okay, the LSAT is full of garbage, so don't like judge this, alright? Some apples are delicious. Delicious things are glorious. And gloriousness is bright. Or things that are glorious are bright. Alright, so, stupid claims. But, if those claims were made, what would you know is true? Some apples
Are bright.
Some apples are bright. What else would you know? You would know some apples are glorious. What else would you know?
Some glorious apples.
Ooh, actually that's tempting but not true. So if some apples are glorious, some means what? Okay, so I would suggest treating it as at least one. The LSAT never makes the distinction between one or two, and some is both singular and plural. So just treat it as at least one. So if I say some apples are delicious, then what I'm saying is there's at least one apple out there in the world that's good, but it's at least one. So it could be all of them. So, like for example, think about this claim for half a second. And I hope there's no medical experts out there who are like, no, that's not necessarily true. But think about this for a second. If I said to you, some humans who are alive today can breathe. Is that true? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I hope that all humans who are alive today can breathe, but it's still true that some humans who are alive today can breathe. For example, all of us here, I hope. And in any case, so when you see some, it's very possible that some can't, that some are not delicious, or maybe even most are not delicious. But we don't know. So we can't say for sure that some are not delicious. Are you cool with that? It's the difference between could be true and must be true. So it could be true that some are not, or maybe even most are not delicious, but we can't say it must be true. Even though it's weird, right? Like, let's say every one of your 5 friends, right? Every single one of them went to your birthday party. You're supposed to be mildly offended. You're like, I have more than 5 friends, jerk. But anyways, let's say all of them, right? I'll grant some of you have 6 friends. All 6 of your friends went to your birthday party, right? And if you turn to another friend and said, yeah, or a neighbor, you're like, yeah, some of my friends went to my birthday party. It's a little misleading because you would suggest, it's kind of suggesting that some didn't go. But that's just in normal everyday speech. When push comes to shove, some just means at least one, which means anything from 1 to 100. Okay, so we know that some apples are delicious, we know that some apples are glorious, we know that some apples are bright, whatever the hell that means. What else do we know?
Delicious things are bright. Some.
Let's see here. Things that are delicious are glorious, so that's all of them. And things that are glorious are bright. Yeah, so everything that's delicious is bright. Oh, resonating in your house. Okay, anyways, what else do we know? You're like, it's 9. It's almost 9 o'clock. Okay, here's a few more things you know, okay? You also, if you know that some apples are delicious, and you know that therefore some of them are glorious, and therefore you know that some of them are bright, you also know that some bright things are apples. Cool? And you know that some glorious things are apples. You also know that some bright things are delicious. Do you know that all bright things are delicious? You know that all glorious things are bright, but does that mean that all bright things are glorious? No, because if all glorious things are bright, there might also be some other things that are bright.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so potential applicants are bright. Right? That does not mean that they're glorious. Okay, question? Yeah.
I might be phrasing this wrong, but do you know that the apples that are delicious and glorious are also bright? Do you know what I mean?
If they're delicious, then they're going to be glorious, which means they're definitely going to be bright.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
they could also, or which of them are singular and which of them have to be together?
I don't know what you mean.
Like which, I guess my question is, if the apples are, is it true that like if they're delicious, they are also always glorious and always
Under
bright?
these circumstances, yes.
Okay.
So we only know that some apples are delicious, right? And so some of the other apples may or may not be delicious. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that some of them are not delicious. In fact, let's assume that most are rotten. Okay? So some apples are delicious, the rest are horrible and not delicious. We know the ones that are delicious, because they are delicious, they have to be glorious, and because they're glorious, they have to be bright. So we know that some apples are bright, all the ones that are delicious. Now the ones that aren't delicious, do we know whether or not they're glorious? No, they could be disgusting and still glorious. Because maybe everything in the world is glorious, right? So delicious things are glorious, and so are non-delicious things. Cool?
Yep.
All right. So notice what we did. We combined 2 or more of the claims to come up with another claim that must be true. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the correct answers, although these are your 2 possible answers, the correct answers are never, ever going to introduce new concepts or things that are too strong. The wrong answers do that all the time. And I really want you to understand this because it has implications for a whole host of other skills that you need to apply on the LSAT. But if I said to you, some apples are delicious, delicious things are glorious, glorious things are bright, and then I said, okay, answer choice A says, what if answer choice A said some fruit are glorious? What would you say?
We don't know that.
Well, okay, so the LSAT is going to require you to make some reasonable assumptions. So assuming that an apple is a fruit seems to fall into that category. So I think that would probably be an okay answer. Wait, what?
No, I was just playing.
Now, it is an assumption though, and being aware of that is actually a really good test-taking skill, because there's some things where you're going to think, oh, I think that's reasonable, but it's technically an assumption, and they may think it's unreasonable. And so then you could actually catch that and say, oh, well, this answer is worse than this other answer because it's making that assumption. I would think that's probably a reasonable assumption, apples are fruit. But in any case, if one of the answer choices said something like, therefore some apples are hard to look at, right? Now it's like, hold up, I see you're trying to get me to pick this answer because it's somewhat related to what you were talking about, but ultimately hard to look at is a new concept. And I would say it's unreasonable to think that something is bright and therefore hard to look at, right? Maybe, but I don't know. So anything that's new is going to be wrong because it doesn't have to be true. Now, the other problem is that some answer choices don't introduce new information, but they go too far. So can someone give me an answer choice that would go too far here, that's not necessarily true, even if it could be true?
All apples are bright.
There you go. All apples are bright, right? That's slam dunk. It's like, whoa. I know some are, but I don't know all are. Now, that could be true, but it goes beyond the evidence. Now, why is this so significant? Because what essentially we're doing is, in these passages, they're giving us what? What kind of thing are they giving us? They're giving us facts. In other words, there's another name for these things. Did someone say news? This is like news, FYI. No, these are like premises, essentially, right? So they're a bunch of premises. And what are premises? They're things, what are they? They're evidence, right? They're claims that are used as evidence. And then they're essentially giving you here, what are they giving you?
Conclusions.
5 possible conclusions. And what you're being asked to do is pick
The one that logically follows.
that logically follows a valid conclusion, as opposed to an invalid conclusion. So, when you think about flaw questions, or strengthen questions, or whatever, no one ever thinks about inference questions. Everybody thinks, oh, inference questions are this whole different category of thing. In fact, they don't even have arguments here. But the skill that you use to find the answer here is the exact same skill that you have to use to figure out what's wrong with an argument. Because when you're trying to decide what's wrong with an argument, you're essentially trying to decide, why don't these premises, as they're stated, prove the conclusion? So if you can get good at these questions, then you can get good at flaw questions, right? Because you can say, oh, I see the premises that you gave me, and I see how they don't quite add up to your conclusion. That's the flaw in the argument. Does that make sense? So, when you're looking at a flaw question and you're having trouble identifying the flaw in the argument, guess where you look? To the conclusion, and you say, is there anything in that conclusion that's new, right? Is this like so obvious that you don't want to say? Or is it so not obvious that you're like, what do you want me to say? I can't tell right now. But if there's anything in the conclusion that's new or too strong, then that's the flaw. Because it doesn't logically follow from the premises that they gave you. Essentially, you can treat flaw questions as must be true questions. You can say, okay, what must be true given what was said, and how is that different from the conclusion? Anyways, something to keep in mind. Bottom line, this is a top-down question because you're being asked to assume that everything here is true, and then you're trying to figure out which answer choice is essentially supported by that information. That information is being used to support one of the 5 answer choices. Okay, strengthen questions, on the other hand, always, except for very, very rare exceptions, always have an argument, which means you're going to have a premise and a conclusion. And that argument cannot be valid. Does anyone have any idea why that argument cannot be valid? Why it has to be flawed? Yes?
Because you're asked to make it better.
You're asked to make it better. And if it's valid, what that means is that the conclusion has been proven by the evidence, so there's no way to make it better. You've already proven your conclusion. You're done. Job completed. Right? So that means there's some problem with this argument, which means the evidence does not prove the conclusion, which means there's something missing. Right? Whenever the evidence fails to prove the conclusion, you essentially need more evidence. And we call those, anyone know? They are premises that are left out. In other words, they are assumptions. Assumptions are just pieces of evidence that were never stated. Okay? And so when you read a passage and it turns out to be an argument, you want to figure out what's missing. Why don't the premises prove the conclusion? Because the correct answer is going to be used to strengthen that argument by filling in those missing pieces. the question will say something like, which one of the following, if true, does the most to strengthen the argument above? Question? And what you're essentially doing is you're looking for the answer choice that is filling in those missing pieces, or at least one of them. Now, over here, we want to run away from answer choices that have new information or are too strong. In a strengthen question, it's actually the opposite. You are looking for new information, right? You just said the argument doesn't have enough evidence, so you're looking for something new. And you're looking for something that's strong, because the stronger the evidence, the more it's going to do to strengthen the conclusion. Now, of course, it has to be on point. It has to help us get to the conclusion from the current premises. But sometimes people get rid of answer choices because like, oh, it's too extreme. In strengthening questions, that's good. Now, this is considered a bottom-up question because you assume all 5 answer choices are true, and you're using them, or at least one of them, to strengthen the conclusion. So one of these answers is supporting the conclusion as opposed to the passage supporting one of these answers. Sound good? Now, these are 2 individual question types. We have inference questions and strengthen questions. But a lot of other question types fall into these 2 categories of top-down versus bottom-up. So I'm just talking about one question type in each category tonight. But when we talk about other question types in the future, we're going to be like, oh, you see how this is a top-down question or how this is a bottom-up question? So you kind of want to get familiar with that concept. Is anyone confused by that idea? The key difference is that in a top-down question, you're assuming the passage is true and you're looking for something that's supported by the passage. In a bottom-up question, you're assuming the 5 answer choices are true and you're looking for something that, you're looking for an answer that, if it were true, would support the passage.
Do they ask them differently?
Yes, so in a top-down question, like an inference question, it would say, if the claims above are true, which one of the following answers must be true? Whereas in a strengthen question, it says, which one of the following answers, if it were true, would do the most to strengthen the argument above? Right, so you have to say, oh, what direction, what am I being asked to support? Am I being asked to support the passage, or am I being asked to support one of the answer choices with the passage? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a few questions together. It'll be a mix of strengthen and inference, and then we'll just go ahead and start talking about them, and we can go from there. Sound good? So as you're doing them, your number one goal is always to understand the passage. Don't worry about the question type, just do I understand the passage? When you're done reading the passage, you should know whether it's an argument or a set of facts. If it's a set of facts, just figure out what must be true. If it's an argument, figure out what's wrong with it. It's a lot to think about, I know, but it's the same strategy over and over again, so we'll keep doing it until it makes sense. And then tonight, try to identify whether you think it's a strengthen question, bottom up, or an inference question, top down. Yes?
I don't have to ask you out loud. It's about a question.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk in a second.
Okay.